A few weeks ago, I received a letter from an African American woman who was in prison. I will call her Jane. Jane did not mention why she was in prison, but she did acknowledge that her actions, which placed her in the prison system, happened on the heels of her being a victim of childhood abuse, as well as in the streets where she was a victim of sexual violence by men who took advantage of her vulnerabilities. She describes her sexual violence as being treated like a piece of meat for men to devour. Jane's letter immediately rerouted my thinking to women who are in prison, who have experienced sexual and domestic violence prior to going to prison, and perhaps while in prison. Statistics show that 75% of women in prison are domestic violence survivors. How did they get there? 29 states will put women in prison when they can't stop their abuser from harming their children. Mandatory arrest laws require police to make an arrest, even if it means jailing the survivor who called for help. A majority of women on Rikers Island report they committed crimes due to the threat of violence from an intimate partner. Of the 75% of these women who are in prison are women of color. They are disproportionately represented within this system. Scholar Beth Ritchie reminds us that the more stigmatized their social position, the more stigmatized their gender, the more stigmatized their sexual orientation, the more they are victimized prior to their imprisonment and while in prison, and the more likely they will be harmed, and the more likely their victimization will not be taken seriously. This is the case of Jane, an African American woman who wrote me. She is a victim, yet her story, her circumstances, her social location, her lack of a support system, her economic standing, yes, her color, her social location, has opened the revolving door to her incarceration. A story that even in our conversations regarding mass incarceration has not been told adequately enough. Ritchie reminds us that this is what happens when the work to end violence against women become more focused on establishing credibility with elite power holders rather than on challenging state institutions or creating social change. And more attention must be paid to social marginalization and community disempowerment. So, my mind today is on Jane and what we can do. We, those of us who are not in jail, those of us who have more power and privilege, we who can serve as advocates for social change and empowerment of women, such as Jane, before and after they are in prison. What did Jane want from me? She wanted prayer, because the only sources she has learned to depend on is God. She wants her case retried, and she is asking for financial assistance to help this come to pass. She wants to tell her story, because even in her imprisoned state, she understands now a new type of freedom. She says so many women are trapped and have no idea how to free themselves because they don't have a blueprint of how to be free and how to stay free. Like many African American men and women in prison, she has learned how to be free whether or not she is freed from the system. In spite of us on the outside, she has found her value and she has found her worth. What did she want from me? She wanted me and others to be an ally, hear her story, believe her, and believe with her that all will be well and that doors will be open for her release. Jane, I will. And I'll write her. I'll say to her, quoting James Baldwin, "You come from sturdy stock, peasant stock. Men and women who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds, achieved an unassailable and monumental dignity. You come from a long line of great poets. One of them said, "The very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off." We cannot be free until they all are free. The work continues. Bless you.